The message arrived on a Tuesday morning when Ambassador Jake Morrison was drinking his third cup of coffee and reading reports about trade negotiations with the Mars colonies. The transmission came through channels that Earth's best scientists still didn't fully understand, appearing simultaneously on every major communication network across the planet. The voice that spoke was melodic and strange, like wind chimes mixed with whale songs, and it carried words that would change everything. "Greetings to the humans of Earth," the voice said through translators that worked better than anything humanity had ever created. "We are the Galactic Peace Council, representatives of 12 civilizations that have watched your species with great interest since your first ventures beyond your home world. We extend to you an invitation to join us at Concordia Station for a gathering of minds seeking harmony among the stars." Jake Morrison set down his coffee cup and stared at the screen. 3 years had passed since first contact, when alien ships had appeared in Earth's orbit and begun what could only be called the most polite invasion in history. The visitors had introduced themselves, shared basic technology, and then mostly kept to themselves while observing human activities from a respectful distance. Most people had grown used to seeing the strange ships in their skies, and children pointed at them the same way they once pointed at airplanes. The message continued with details that made Jake's head spin. The Peace Council consisted of species with names like Zephyrians, Vorthak, Krillians, and Thalassans. They had been trying to resolve territorial disputes in something called the Andromeda Spiral for over 200 years. Their ancient conflicts had reached a deadlock that threatened to spread into outright war, and they believed that humanity might offer fresh perspectives as newcomers to galactic politics. "Your species demonstrates unique problem-solving abilities and a remarkable capacity for adaptation," the message explained. "We have observed your diplomatic efforts on your own world and believe you may possess insights that could help us find peaceful solutions to our disagreements. We request that you send a small delegation to serve as neutral observers and advisors." Jake Morrison had spent 20 years in the Marines before becoming a diplomat, and he had learned to recognize opportunity when it knocked. This wasn't just first contact anymore. This was humanity's chance to become players on a galactic stage. He immediately began making calls to assemble a team. Dr. Katie Bell was the obvious choice for linguistics. She had mastered 17 Earth languages and had been working with the alien translation protocols since first contact. Her ability to understand not just words but the cultural meanings behind them had impressed even the aliens during their initial meetings. When Jake called her, she was in her office at Cambridge University, surrounded by books and computer screens displaying alien text samples. "Katie, I need you to pack a bag," Jake said without preamble. "We're going to represent humanity at an alien peace conference." "When do we leave?" she asked, already reaching for her travel case. Colonel Ryan Hayes was harder to convince. The military advisor had been skeptical of alien intentions from the beginning, though he had grudgingly admitted that their behavior suggested genuine peaceful purposes. His expertise in conflict resolution and peacekeeping operations made him invaluable, but his suspicious nature made him cautious about accepting alien invitations. "They could be testing our capabilities," Ryan argued during their video conference. "This could be intelligence gathering disguised as diplomacy." "It could be," Jake agreed, "but it could also be exactly what they say it is. Either way, we need someone with your experience there to assess the situation." Dr. Amy Foster completed the team. The cultural anthropologist had spent her career studying how different human societies resolved conflicts and built lasting peace agreements. Her work on the successful integration of refugee populations had caught international attention, and her theories about cultural bridge building seemed perfectly suited for interspecies diplomacy. "This is the opportunity of several lifetimes," Amy said when Jake explained the mission. "The chance to study how different alien cultures interact and find common ground could revolutionize our understanding of social dynamics." The team assembled at Cape Canaveral 2 weeks later, where the exploration vessel New Horizon waited for them. The ship was a marvel of human engineering enhanced with alien technology, capable of faster-than-light travel that still made scientists argue about the laws of physics. Jake had commanded military vessels before, but nothing had prepared him for the sleek design and incomprehensible systems that could carry them across the galaxy in days rather than centuries. The journey to Concordia Station took 6 days, during which the team reviewed everything known about the participating alien species. The files made for fascinating reading, though Jake suspected they barely scratched the surface of what they would encounter. The Zephyrians were described as energy-based beings who communicated through electromagnetic pulses and lived in structures that defied conventional physics. The Vorthak were crystalline entities that grew rather than reproduced and thought in geological timescales. The Krillians resembled Earth insects but had developed technology based on biological engineering that could reshape matter at the molecular level. The Thalassans lived in liquid environments and had never developed fire or metallurgy, yet had somehow achieved space travel through methods human scientists couldn't explain. Each species represents a completely different approach to existence, Amy observed as they studied the files. This isn't just about resolving their territorial dispute. This is about finding ways for fundamentally different forms of life to coexist. The question is whether they see us as potential mediators or potential threats, Ryan said, ever the pessimist. We don't know what their surveillance has told them about human history. Katie looked up from her linguistic studies. Their invitation suggests they view us positively. The translation protocols they're using are incredibly sophisticated, which means they've put real effort into communicating with us clearly. That's usually a good sign. Jake watched the stars stream past through the observation deck windows and felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. Humanity was about to take its place among the galactic community, and the decisions made at this conference could determine whether that place would be as respected allies or barely tolerated newcomers. He had negotiated peace treaties between human nations, but those conflicts had involved species that shared the same basic biology and environmental needs. The message indicator chimed, announcing their approach to Concordia Station. Through the viewports, they could see a structure that dwarfed anything humanity had ever built, a gleaming complex of interconnected modules that housed the hopes and fears of 12 different civilizations. In a few hours, they would discover whether humanity was ready for the challenges that awaited them among the stars. Concordia Station stretched out before them like a small city floating in space, its crystalline spires and flowing organic curves defying every architectural principle Jake Morrison had ever learned. The docking bay alone was larger than most Earth airports, filled with ships that looked more like works of art than functional vehicles. Some appeared to be grown rather than built, their surfaces rippling with bioluminescent patterns, while others seemed to be carved from single massive gems that caught and reflected light in impossible ways. The airlock cycled with a soft whisper, and Jake stepped onto alien soil for the first time in his life. The gravity felt lighter than Earth normal, and the air carried scents he couldn't identify, sweet and metallic with undertones that reminded him of ozone after lightning strikes. Behind him, Katie Bell was already taking notes in her electronic tablet, her eyes wide with excitement as she observed the welcome party waiting for them. The first being Jake saw looked like a pillar of shifting aurora light, colors flowing through its translucent form in patterns that hurt to watch directly. This was Ambassador Zephy of the Zephyrians, and according to the briefing files, it was considered one of the most patient and diplomatic minds in the galaxy. The creature floated slightly above the deck, its energy field crackling with what Jake hoped was enthusiasm rather than hostile intent. "Welcome, beings of Earth," the Zephyrian said, its voice arriving through speakers built into the walls rather than from any visible mouth. "We are honored by your presence at this gathering of minds seeking harmony." Jake stepped forward and extended his hand in the traditional human greeting. "Thank you for inviting us, Ambassador. I'm Jake Morrison, and we're grateful for this opportunity to learn about your civilizations and hopefully contribute to finding peaceful solutions." The moment Jake's hand made contact with the Zephyrian's energy field, everything went wrong. The alien's form flickered and sparked like a broken light bulb, colors shifting rapidly from peaceful blues and greens to alarming reds and oranges. The creature's voice became a harsh static burst that made everyone in the docking bay recoil. Several nearby beings that looked like walking crystals began flashing urgent warning patterns, their faceted surfaces blazing with light that could have guided ships through hyperspace. "Apologies," Jake said quickly, pulling his hand back. "I didn't mean to cause any harm. On Earth, we shake hands as a sign of friendship and respect." The Zephyrian slowly reformed, its colors gradually returning to calmer hues, though worried yellow streaks continued to pulse through its body. "Physical contact is intense for our species. We did not expect such direct interaction." This explains much about human communication patterns we have observed. Katie Bell stepped forward with her tablet, stylus moving rapidly as she documented the interaction. "This is fascinating," she said, speaking partly to herself and partly to the assembled aliens. The cultural implications of contact-based greetings versus energy field communication could explain the differences in social structures we've noted in the preliminary data. "I need to record everything about this interaction pattern." The crystalline beings, which Jake recognized as Vorthak from the briefing materials, began flashing more urgently. Their leader, a towering figure that looked like a living geode, stepped forward with movements that sounded like wind chimes in an earthquake. "The human demonstrates information-gathering behavior. Is this standard reconnaissance protocol for your species?" "Reconnaissance?" Katie looked confused. "No, I'm just taking notes for our research. As a linguist and cultural anthropologist, I study how different societies communicate and interact. This meeting represents an unprecedented opportunity to understand interspecies social dynamics." Amy Foster joined the conversation, pulling out her own recording device. "From an anthropological perspective, the way each species approaches first contact reveals fundamental aspects of their social organization. The fact that Zephyrians use energy fields for communication while humans rely on physical contact suggests completely different evolutionary pressures and survival strategies." The Vorthak leader's crystal surface shifted to deep purple, which the translation system indicated meant concern or alarm. "The humans possess extensive analytical capabilities and demonstrate immediate adaptation to new social environments. This level of behavioral flexibility is unprecedented in our experience with developing species." Colonel Ryan Hayes maintained his position near the shuttle, observing the interactions with practiced military awareness. When a group of insectoid beings approached from another part of the docking bay, he automatically shifted to face them while keeping the rest of the welcoming party in his peripheral vision. The movement was subtle, a basic security precaution he had performed thousands of times, but it had an immediate effect on the alien observers. The human soldier displays threat assessment behavior. One of the insectoids clicked through the translation system. His positioning suggests defensive combat readiness despite peaceful circumstances. Ryan looked surprised. "I'm just keeping situational awareness. Standard diplomatic security protocol. We always maintain visual contact with all parties during initial meetings to ensure everyone's safety. Safety concerns during peaceful gatherings," another Vorthak muttered, its crystal form shifting to amber. "This implies expectation of potential conflict even in diplomatic settings. Most unusual for a species seeking peaceful contact." Jake realized the conversation was taking an unexpected turn. "Colonel Hayes is here as a military advisor with extensive experience in peacekeeping operations. His expertise in conflict resolution has been valuable in resolving disputes between human nations. We thought his knowledge might be helpful in understanding your territorial disagreements." The word territorial seemed to cause a ripple of unease through the assembled aliens. The insectoid delegation took several steps backward, their compound eyes reflecting light in agitated patterns. One of the Zephyrians dimmed noticeably, while the Vorthak began a rapid crystal-chiming discussion among themselves. "Humans engage in territorial conflicts?" the lead insectoid asked, its voice carrying overtones of distress. "Your species disputes land boundaries through organized violence?" "Well, yes, historically," Jake admitted. "But we've learned to resolve most disputes through negotiation and international law. That's exactly why we're here, to share what we've learned about moving from conflict to cooperation." Amy Foster nodded enthusiastically. "Human history provides countless examples of successful conflict resolution. We've developed sophisticated diplomatic frameworks for managing resource disputes, territorial boundaries, and cultural differences. Our species has extensive experience in transitioning from adversarial relationships to cooperative partnerships." The aliens exchanged what could only be described as worried glances, though the expressions were filtered through energy fields, crystal patterns, and compound eyes. Katie Bell noticed the change in atmosphere and looked up from her notes. "Is something wrong? Have we said something inappropriate?" The Zephyrian ambassador dimmed further. "Your species discusses organized conflict as a normal aspect of social development. This suggests a level of aggressive capability that was not apparent in our long-range observations of your peaceful space missions." "Aggressive?" Jake felt like he was missing something important. We're not aggressive. We're here to help find peaceful solutions. Everything we've told you demonstrates our commitment to resolving conflicts without violence. But even as he spoke, Jake could see that their words were having the opposite effect. The alien delegations were backing away slowly, and several beings he hadn't noticed before were speaking urgently into communication devices. Whatever humanity had intended to communicate, the message being received was clearly different. The Vorthak leader's crystal form flashed a brief, urgent pattern before returning to nervous amber. Perhaps we should escort you to your accommodations so you may rest after your journey. The formal sessions will begin tomorrow and we have much to prepare. As they were led through corridors that curved and twisted in ways that made no geometric sense, Jake caught fragments of alien conversations that the translation system was picking up. Words like combat capable, territorial disputes, and threat assessment kept appearing, along with phrases he was pretty sure weren't compliments. Their peaceful diplomatic mission was already creating waves they didn't understand, and they hadn't even reached their first official meeting yet. The main conference chamber was a marvel of alien engineering that made Jake Morrison feel like he was standing inside a giant soap bubble. The walls curved impossibly upward, their surfaces shifting between transparency and opacity as different species adjusted the lighting to suit their needs. Floating platforms accommodated delegates who couldn't use traditional seating, while pools of various liquids housed aquatic representatives. The air itself seemed to shimmer with translation fields that converted every word, gesture, and chemical signal into something the other species could understand. Jake found himself seated at a crystalline table that had apparently grown from the floor, specifically for the human delegation. Around them, 12 different species arranged themselves according to protocols that had taken centuries to develop. The Zephyrians flickered in midair like living rainbows, while the Vorthak stood motionless as living statues. The insectoid Krillians clustered together in constantly shifting formations, and the aquatic thalassans observed from tanks that bubbled with gases Jake couldn't identify. Before we address the territorial concerns in the Andromeda Spiral, announced the session moderator, a being that looked like a tree made of liquid mercury, we would welcome our new colleagues to share information about their homeworld environment. Understanding environmental influences often provides insight into diplomatic perspectives. Jake stood up, grateful for a chance to start with something positive. Thank you for this opportunity. Earth is what we consider a fairly standard terrestrial planet. We have a gravity of 9.8 meters per second squared, which feels comfortable for most human activities. Our atmosphere is about 21% oxygen, and we have a nice variety of climates ranging from tropical to Arctic. The moment he mentioned Earth's gravity, a visible ripple of shock went through the assembled delegates. Several of the Zephyrians flickered rapidly, their colors shifting to alarmed oranges and reds. The Vorthak began that crystal-chiming conversation again, but this time the sounds carried undertones that the translation system labeled as extreme concern. Meters per second squared? One of the thalassans gurgled from its tank. That gravitational force would crush most known species. How do your people survive under such extreme conditions? Jake looked confused. Extreme? I thought that was pretty normal. I mean, it's what we evolved in, so it feels natural to us. We can function just fine in gravity up to about twice that, and some of our athletes train in higher gravity to improve their performance. The insectoid delegation erupted into rapid clicking sounds that the translator struggled to keep up with. Words like pressure adaptation and extreme environment survival kept appearing in the translation stream. One of the larger Krillians stepped forward, its compound eyes reflecting the chamber's shifting lights. Your species thrives in gravitational conditions that would be lethal to most galactic civilizations, it stated. This suggests extraordinary physical durability. What other environmental extremes do humans routinely endure? Katie Bell looked up from her notes, happy to contribute. Oh, humans live pretty much everywhere on Earth. We have settlements in deserts where temperatures reach 50 degrees Celsius, and research stations in Antarctica where it drops to minus 60. Some people live at altitudes where the air pressure is less than half of sea level, and others work underwater for extended periods. We're pretty adaptable. The silence that followed was so complete that Jake could hear the bubbling from the thalassan tanks. Every alien in the chamber had stopped moving, stopped communicating, stopped doing whatever passed for breathing in their respective biologies. The Mercury tree moderator's surface rippled with patterns that suggested deep disturbance. Your species inhabits temperature ranges that span over 100 degrees, the moderator finally said. You survive in atmospheric pressures from near vacuum to deep compression. You have colonized environments that would be classified as uninhabitable death zones by galactic standards. Amy Foster sensed an opportunity to explain human cultural development. That's exactly what makes us good at finding solutions to different problems. Having to adapt to so many different environments taught us flexibility and cooperation. Human societies developed independently in deserts, mountains, islands, and forests, which is why we have such diverse approaches to conflict resolution. But her explanation seemed to make things worse. The Vorthak leader's crystal form flashed bright red, which the translation system indicated meant danger alert. Several smaller aliens had retreated to the far edges of their platforms, putting as much distance as possible between themselves and the human delegation. Multiple independent civilization development, one of the Zephyrians said, its voice carrying electromagnetic overtones of disbelief. Your species achieved technological advancement in parallel across multiple extreme environments simultaneously? Well, yes, Amy continued, not understanding the growing alarm. We had civilizations in Egypt, China, India, Mesopotamia, the Americas, and dozens of other places, all developing different technologies and social systems at the same time. It took thousands of years, but eventually we learned to share knowledge and work together, instead of competing. Katie Bell was fascinated by the linguistic implications. Human language diversity is incredible too. We have over 7,000 distinct languages on Earth, and most humans can learn multiple languages throughout their lives. Children routinely become fluent in 2 or 3 languages before they reach adulthood, and some adults master dozens of different communication systems. The insectoid translator began making sounds like a broken engine. Linguistic adaptability on that scale suggests cognitive processing capabilities far beyond standard parameters. How many different communication methods can individual humans master? It varies, Katie said, warming to her favorite subject. Some people learn 5 or 6 languages fluently. Others focus on specific types like programming languages or mathematical notation systems. I personally speak 17 Earth languages, and I've been working on understanding your translation protocols. The complexity is fascinating, but humans are pretty good at pattern recognition and abstract thinking. Colonel Ryan Hayes decided to contribute something positive about human cooperation. What Katie and Amy are describing shows why humans are good at peacekeeping. We've had to learn how to communicate across different cultures and environments. In my military experience, we've developed protocols for operating in every climate on Earth. From jungle warfare to Arctic operations to desert combat. The word combat seemed to hit the chamber like a physical blow. Several delegates actually flinched, and the Thalassan tanks began bubbling more rapidly, which the translation system indicated meant emergency chemical reactions. Combat protocols for multiple extreme environments, the Mercury moderator repeated slowly. Your military forces are trained to conduct warfare in the same uninhabitable conditions that your civilians populate for normal living. Ryan looked around the chamber, finally noticing the alarmed postures and warning colors displayed by every alien present. Well, yes, but that's just practical training. You have to be prepared for any situation if you want to protect people effectively. Most of it is just endurance training anyway. Learning to function when you're tired, hungry, cold, or operating on minimal sleep. Minimal sleep? One of the smaller aliens squeaked. How long can humans function without rest? The official record is about 11 days, Ryan answered matter-of-factly, though most people start having problems after 2 or 3 days without sleep. In military training, we learn to operate effectively on just a few hours of rest when necessary. Jake watched the alien reactions with growing unease. What should have been a friendly introduction was clearly going wrong, but he couldn't understand why. Everything they had shared was completely normal human behavior, the kind of basic information any species would share about their homeworld and capabilities. The Mercury moderator's surface rippled with patterns that looked almost like a shutter. Perhaps we should adjourn for today to allow all delegations time to process this information. We will reconvene tomorrow to begin addressing the territorial dispute. As the aliens filed out of the chamber, with what could only be described as nervous haste, Jake caught fragments of conversations that the translation system was still picking up. Words like apex predators, environmental extremophiles, and multi-terrain combat capability drifted through the air. Whatever humanity's reputation had been before this meeting, it was clearly something very different now. Jake Morrison woke up to the sound of his communication device buzzing with urgent messages. The artificial morning light in their guest quarters was trying to simulate Earth's sunrise, but the gentle blue glow felt nothing like home. Through the transparent walls he could see alien ships moving through space around Concordia Station, with more urgency than they had shown the day before. Something had changed overnight, and Jake had a sinking feeling that humanity was somehow responsible. The first message was from the station's administrative system, informing them that the morning session had been delayed while the various delegations held emergency consultations. The second message was from Ambassador HFY, requesting that the humans remain in their quarters until security protocols could be updated. The third message made Jake's stomach drop completely. Priority communication from Galactic Council Security Division, the translation system announced in emotionless tones. All delegations are advised that enhanced protective measures are now in effect. Station defensive systems have been activated as a precautionary measure, while threat assessment procedures are completed. Katie Bell emerged from her room looking confused and carrying her tablet, which was displaying a stream of intercepted communications that the station's translation network was picking up. "Jake, you need to see this. The aliens spent all night talking about us, and I don't think it's good news." The intercepted messages painted a picture that was both hilarious and terrifying. The Zephyrian delegation had filed a formal report describing humans as high-gravity adaptation specialists with extreme environmental tolerance. The Vorthak had classified humanity as a species demonstrating unprecedented physical durability and multi-biome colonization capabilities. The Krillians had noted advanced cognitive flexibility with demonstrated multilinguistic processing and rapid cultural adaptation. They're talking about us like we're some kind of super predators, Amy Foster said, joining them in the common area. Look at this entry from the Thalassen delegation. Human species demonstrates characteristics consistent with apex survival organisms. Recommend extreme caution in all interactions. Colonel Ryan Hayes was studying the station schematics that had been provided for their orientation. The defensive systems they activated aren't just shields and early warning sensors. These are full military-grade protection protocols. They're not just being careful. They're genuinely scared of us. The situation became clearer when they were finally escorted to the dining hall for the delayed morning meal. The moment they entered, Jake noticed that every other delegation had positioned themselves as far away from the human table as the chamber's design would allow. The Zephyrians had dimmed their energy fields to barely visible levels. The Vorthak had arranged themselves in defensive crystal formations, and the insectoid Krillians were clustered together like they were preparing for battle. "Good morning, everyone," Jake called out, trying to maintain diplomatic courtesy. "I hope you all slept well." The response was a wave of nervous electromagnetic pulses, crystal chimes, and clicking sounds that the translation system struggled to process. Finally, one of the braver Thalassans spoke from the safety of its tank. "Human delegation, we have been comparing observations about your species. The information shared yesterday has raised certain concerns about the nature of your biological capabilities." Katie Bell looked genuinely puzzled. "Concerns? We just told you basic information about Earth and human society. What's concerning about that?" A Vorthak representative stepped forward, its crystal form flashing cautious yellow patterns. "You mentioned that humans engage in an activity called sunbathing, where you deliberately expose yourselves to solar radiation for recreational purposes. Our analysis indicates that the radiation levels required to achieve the skin color changes you described would be lethal to most known species." Amy Foster laughed, thinking this was a simple misunderstanding. "Oh, that's just getting a tan. It's completely normal. Humans actually need some sun exposure to synthesize vitamin D. We spend hours outside in direct sunlight all the time. Children play in it, people work in it, athletes compete in it. Solar radiation is just part of our daily environment." The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of several alien delegates activating what appeared to be additional protective equipment. One of the Krillians began backing toward the exit, while maintaining visual contact with the humans. "Your offspring engage in recreational activities under Radiation that would sterilize our young. It clicked in distressed tones. This confirms that humans are radiation-resistant organisms with extreme tolerance for environmental hazards. The meal itself created even more problems. The station's food service had prepared a variety of dishes suitable for different species, ranging from the crystalline mineral supplements preferred by the Vorthak to the liquid nutrients that the thalassans consumed. When the human delegation was served, Jake politely tried a bit of everything, thanking their hosts for the variety. "This is fascinating," Katie said, sampling a Zephyrian energy cube that glowed faintly blue. "The molecular structure is completely different from Earth food, but it's providing nutritional value." "How do you achieve protein synthesis without carbon-based amino acids?" Amy tried the Krillian biopaste, which had the consistency of yogurt but tasted like flowers. "This is incredible. The flavor profile suggests complex chemical compounds that Earth plants can't produce. Your agricultural biotechnology must be incredibly advanced." Colonel Ryan Hayes was practical in his approach, eating whatever was provided without complaint. "Food is food. In survival training, we learn to eat whatever's available to maintain energy levels. This is actually pretty good compared to some of the field rations I've had." The alien observers watched this display with what could only be described as horror. To species that had evolved as specialists, each adapted to very specific dietary requirements, the sight of humans casually consuming substances that should have been toxic to them was deeply unsettling. "The humans demonstrate universal nutritional adaptation," one of the thalassans bubbled in distress. "They can process biological matter from multiple species without apparent difficulty. This suggests digestive systems capable of breaking down almost any organic compounds." "Omnivorous consumption patterns," a Zephyrian added, its colors shifting to worried oranges. "They can derive energy from both plant and animal sources, as well as synthetic compounds developed by different evolutionary paths. This indicates extreme metabolic flexibility." The breaking point came when Katie mentioned human reproduction and child-rearing practices during what she thought was casual conversation. She was trying to explain human family structures to a Vorthak who had asked about social organization. "Human families typically have 2 to 4 children," she said cheerfully. "Children are dependent for about 18 years while they learn and develop. But humans can have offspring every year or two if they choose. Most human societies value large families, and some individuals have 10 or more children during their lifetime." The effect was immediate and dramatic. Every alien in the dining hall stopped eating simultaneously. Several delegates began making rapid communications on devices that Jake was pretty sure were emergency transmitters. The Krillian delegation stood up as a group and began moving toward the exit with movements that looked suspiciously like a tactical retreat. "Your species achieves reproductive maturity in less than 2 decades, the Mercury Tree moderator said, its voice carrying overtones of disbelief. "And individuals can produce multiple offspring annually with minimal recovery time. This represents a population growth rate that exceeds every known galactic species by orders of magnitude." Jake finally began to understand what was happening. Every normal aspect of human biology and behavior was being interpreted through the lens of species that had evolved under completely different conditions. To aliens who took decades to mature a single offspring, humanity's reproductive rate was alarming. To species that lived in stable, specialized environments, human adaptability was frightening. To beings who had never faced the kind of environmental pressures that Earth routinely provided, human durability seemed impossible. "I think we need to have a serious conversation about expectations and misunderstandings," Jake said carefully, but he could see that it might already be too late. The fear in the dining hall was palpable, and he had a growing suspicion that the territorial dispute they had come to mediate was about to become a much smaller problem than humanity's unexpected reputation as the galaxy's most terrifying newcomers. Jake Morrison couldn't sleep on the final night of what was supposed to be a diplomatic conference, but had turned into the galaxy's most unintentional horror show. The guest quarters felt more like a containment facility now, with security sensors that hadn't been there when they arrived, and energy barriers that hummed with protective power. Through the transparent walls, he could see alien ships positioning themselves in what looked suspiciously like defensive formations around Concordia Station. The truth hit him when he overheard a conversation between 2 Krillian security officers who apparently didn't realize the translation system was still active in the corridors. Their clicking conversation was being converted into words that made Jake's heart sink. "The evacuation schedules are complete," one of them was saying. "Priority delegations will be transferred to secure vessels within 6 hours if the humans demonstrate any aggressive behavior during tomorrow's session." "What about the territorial dispute resolution?" the other asked. "Irrelevant now. The Council's primary concern is containing the human threat and preventing them from establishing territorial claims in the Andromeda Spiral. The Zephyrians believe this entire peace conference was a reconnaissance mission." Jake quietly woke his team and gathered them in the common area. "We have a problem," he said, explaining what he had overheard. "They think we're here to scout for an invasion, not to help with mediation." Katie Bell looked devastated. "This is completely backwards. We came here to build bridges between species, not to terrify them into thinking we're conquerors." "The question is how we fix this," Amy Foster said, her anthropologist mind already working on the problem. "We've accidentally triggered every possible fear response in species that have never encountered anything like humanity. They don't understand that our apparent advantages came from necessity, not aggression." Colonel Ryan Hayes was studying the intercepted security protocols on his tablet. According to these files, they're planning to classify Earth as a restricted system and recommend that no galactic ships approach human space without military escort. "We're about to become the galaxy's official bogeyman." "Not if I can help it," Jake said, his diplomatic instincts finally kicking in properly. "We caused this misunderstanding and we're going to fix it. But we need to do it in a way that doesn't make things worse." The next morning, Jake requested an emergency session with the full Galactic Council, including representatives from all 12 species. When they assembled in the main conference chamber, the difference from their first meeting was striking. Every delegation had positioned themselves behind protective barriers. Security personnel were visible at every entrance, and the air itself seemed to crackle with defensive energy fields. "Honored delegates," Jake began, standing in the center of the chamber where everyone could see him clearly. "We've become aware that our presence here has caused significant concern and misunderstanding. We came here hoping to help resolve the territorial disputes in the Andromeda Spiral, but instead we seem to have created new problems. I'd like to address these concerns directly." The Mercury Tree moderator's surface rippled nervously. "Human Delegate Morrison, this session was called to discuss safety protocols and territorial restrictions, not to continue the mediation process." "That's exactly why we need to talk," Jake replied. "Because everything you're afraid of is based on fundamental misunderstandings about what humans are and why we're here." Amy Foster stepped forward with a presentation she had prepared during the night. "Every characteristic that has alarmed you represents humanity's response to environmental challenges, not aggressive capabilities. We didn't develop high-gravity tolerance to become warriors. We developed it because Earth's gravity is what we had to work with. We didn't become radiation-resistant to invade other worlds. We became radiation-resistant because our sun was the only energy source available. Earth is what galactic science would classify as a death world," Katie Bell added, consulting her tablet. "Extreme gravity, dangerous radiation, wildly variable climate, unstable geology, and aggressive biological competition. Humans didn't choose these conditions. We evolved to survive them. Everything that seems frightening about us is actually evidence of how difficult our home environment is." The Zephyrian ambassador flickered with uncertain colors. "You claim that your apparent advantages are defensive adaptations rather than offensive capabilities." "Exactly," Jake said. "Humans learned to work together because individual survival on Earth was nearly impossible. We developed diverse cultures because different environments required different solutions. We learned multiple languages because communication was essential for cooperation. Our military training exists to protect people, not to conquer territory." Colonel Ryan Hayes addressed the security concerns directly. "My combat experience comes from resolving conflicts between human groups, not from expanding human territory. Every peacekeeping mission I've been part of focused on protecting civilians and establishing stable conditions for diplomatic solutions. That's why I'm here, to apply those same principles to help resolve your territorial dispute." The chamber fell silent as the aliens processed this information. Finally, one of the Thalassans spoke from its protective tank. "You suggest that human capabilities developed as survival mechanisms rather than predatory advantages?" Consider the evidence, Amy said, warming to her favorite subject. Species that evolve as predators typically develop specialized hunting tools, enhanced speed, natural weapons, improved stealth capabilities. Humans developed tool-making, communication, and cooperation. We became persistence hunters who succeeded through endurance and teamwork, not through domination. Katie Bell pulled up linguistic data on the chamber's display systems. Human language evolution supports this. We developed complex communication systems, specifically to coordinate group activities and share knowledge. Predatory species typically have simpler communication focused on territory and dominance. Human languages are designed for teaching, storytelling, and collaborative problem-solving. The breakthrough came when Jake directly addressed the territorial dispute that had brought them all together. Your conflict over the Andromeda Spiral has lasted 200 years, because you're thinking about territory the way species with stable environments think about resources. But humans learned that the key to resolving territorial disputes isn't determining who gets what. It's figuring out how everyone can get what they need. Explain this approach, the Vorthak leader said. Its crystal form shifting to cautious interest rather than alarm. The Krillians need access to the mineral-rich asteroids for their biotechnology, Jake continued. The Thalassans need the liquid hydrocarbon deposits for their energy systems. But you're fighting over control instead of access. Why not establish a shared resource extraction system where both species benefit from each other's specialized capabilities? Amy Foster expanded on the concept. Human history is full of similar solutions. We learned to turn zero-sum territorial conflicts into positive-sum resource-sharing agreements. The key is recognizing that different species have different strengths and different needs. A Krillian bioprocessing facility could extract the minerals you need while simultaneously refining the hydrocarbons that the Thalassans require, Katie suggested. Both species get what they need. Neither has to fight for exclusive territory, and both benefit from the other's technological advantages. The silence that followed was different from the fearful quiet of the previous days. This was thoughtful consideration rather than terrified paralysis. The alien delegates began discussing the proposal among themselves, their conversations carrying tones of interest rather than alarm. This approach demonstrates the cooperative problem-solving that humans developed from necessity, Jake explained. We're not here to take anyone's territory or to impose human solutions. We're here to share the techniques we learned for turning conflicts into collaborations. The Zephyrian ambassador brightened to hopeful blues and greens. Your species offers partnership rather than domination? That's all we've ever offered, Jake said. Everything that seemed threatening about us is actually evidence of our commitment to finding ways for different groups to coexist successfully. We want to learn from your civilizations just as much as we want to share what we've learned. The Mercury Tree moderator's surface smoothed into calm ripples. Perhaps we have indeed misunderstood the nature of human intentions. Your proposal for the Andromeda Spiral demonstrates practical wisdom rather than territorial ambition. By the end of the session, the territorial dispute that had deadlocked the galaxy for 2 centuries was resolved through a resource-sharing agreement that gave both species more than they could have achieved through conflict. The defensive barriers came down, the evacuation plans were canceled, and the security alerts were replaced with celebration preparations. 3 days later, the Galactic Council voted unanimously to establish a permanent human advisory position, recognizing that the species that had once seemed terrifyingly powerful was actually terrifyingly good at solving problems that had stumped everyone else. Jake Morrison returned to Earth knowing that humanity's reputation among the stars was secure, though he suspected that alien children would be hearing bedtime story